Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LEC Playoff Primer video. The last of the Playoff Primer series here. We've done the LCS, we've done the LCK, we've done the LPL. Obviously, those were quite a bit ago in terms of time. Their playoffs all started a weekend before the LECs, so the LECs gets delayed here a little bit, but we are here for my LEC Playoff Primer video. In this video, we are going to be going over everything that has to do with not only the LEC regular season coming to a close, but also the predictions for the playoffs up and coming. If you guys are excited for that, let me know down in the comment section below. There are a lot of things we're going to be talking about here today. We're going to be starting off with my award picks in the regular season. Obviously, awards have already been announced for the LEC, but I wanted to do them in my Playoff Primer video, so they are coming out for me today. That's my MVP, my Rookie of the Split, as well as my 3 All-Pro teams. And then I will be going over all 3 of the matchups that we are getting in round 1 of the LEC playoffs. And then finally at the end, a full bracket prediction for what I think is going to be happening here. If you guys are excited for that, leave a like, let me know down in the comment section below. I don't usually ask for all that stuff at the beginning of videos, but these Playoff Primer videos do take quite a bit more effort to put together, so if you guys are enjoying them, let me know. But let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and jump right into our first section here, and that's going to be the awards section. We'll be kicking off the awards section with the biggest one of them all, MVP. Now, if you had followed my weekly recaps for the LEC, you'll know there are quite a few people that have been in conversation for my MVP over the course of the year. A lot of people, I think, have been really playing well, and nobody's really truly completely separated themselves, I think, from the pack in the LEC. I think there's been a lot of good players, but a lot of them are kind of all good, you know what I mean? They've all been useful for their team. So who did I end up settling on? Well, my summer 2022 MVP in the LEC is going to be Nisqy on Mad Lions, and this was definitely a difficult decision, I think, for a little while. Obviously, I think going into the final week of the season, I actually did not have Nisqy favored for this award. My favorite for this award was Perks, and that ended up not working out. He had a very bad week 8. They missed playoffs, completely bounced out. There's really no way that I could give MVP to a player who didn't even make playoffs, so for me, it goes to Nisqy, even if I felt that, you know, Perks was the most important player to his team's success. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to put his team over the hump, especially towards the back half of the split. So let's talk about what Nisqy did right here. I mean, what an unbelievable turnaround for Nisqy. You can talk about how he really unlocked what Mad Lions did, but let's just all put this into context for a second. He did not have a team in spring. Like, this wasn't someone who just kind of, you know, had a couple of down years and then came back and figured it out. He was actually teamless, actually jobless a couple of months ago. Comes back into Mad Lions here, tries to pick up where Reeker, you know, really couldn't for this Mad Lions team, tries to stabilize that mid lane spot with a little bit more experience, a little bit more macro sense, definitely a more supportive mentality here, with some more aggressive players like Elyoya, like Arma, like Unforgiven, kind of surrounding him. Nisqy comes in here to kind of be the quote-unquote enabler for all of it, and it works better than anybody could have ever predicted for this Mad Lions team. I think a lot of people expected Nisqy to be quite the upgrade, but I don't think they expected him to come out and be the MVP here in summer. And for me, this is a pretty easy choice. It is Nisqy. Mad Lions really was unlocked because of him. He was the guy for that team this year, even if he wasn't with, you know, in damage percentage numbers, he definitely was in terms of impact on the game. I think without Nisqy, Mad Lions is looking like a completely different team. You can see kind of his play style in a little bit of the champions that he's played in, the Taliyah, the Sylas, the Lissandra, things like that, the more supportive, macro-oriented style plays. He's not going to be the one sitting in the back of a team fight on Azir most of the time. He definitely still can, but he's really not going to be the one sitting in the back of a team fight on Azir trying to take over the game with his damage. He's going to be the Taliyah roaming at 5 to 10 minutes with his jungler to try to make him play bot lane, to guarantee an objective. He's going to be the Sylas that's going to be able to steal an ultimate and be able to be useful in a wide variety of circumstances. There are a lot of different options that Nisqy gives you, and really what he did was just open up the possibilities for everybody else on Mad Lions, most specifically Elyoya in the jungle. And so for that, I think Nisqy definitely deserves the MVP. I think he unlocked his team more than anybody else in the region, and I don't even know if there was really a lot of competition for this award. I did put Perks in second because at the end of the day, it is still Perks. Like, he did still have a super good year, even if it wasn't perfect, you know what I mean? Like, even if he didn't have the best, like, most perfect year, he still is there. I gotta give a big shout out to Unforgiven here, also on Mad Lions, and then also Comp on Rogue. We'll be talking about them a little bit more later when we get to some of the all-pro teams, but those were kind of the big four that I was really thinking about for MVP, was Nisqy, Perks, Unforgiven, and Comp. I think those 4 players were probably the most impactful to their team's success this year, but for me, it lands on Nisqy because more so than pretty much any of those other players, I have a really hard time seeing Mad Lions in a situation where they replace Nisqy with an average player at that position and are even remotely the same kind of team. And so, for me, Nisqy ends up getting the nod here for my MVP award. Moving on to our second big award here. We've gone over MVP. It is now time to go over Rookie of the Split. Now, a couple of disclaimers here that I'll get into. LEC is the only region left of the major 4 regions that still does Rookie of the Split and not Rookie of the Year. And so I ended up putting a Rookie of the Split. I will talk about what would have happened if, they had caught up to the rest of the world and done a Rookie of the Year. But just to make it clear, only players who are new in summer, if they play, are allowed to win this award. If they played in spring, disqualified, unfortunately. So, that does take out quite a bit of the candidates, but that does leave one of the main ones luckily intact, and it should be pretty obvious, I think, to pretty much everybody. But my Rookie of the Split here in summer of 2022 is Jonghoon on Astralis. Jonghoon was just so good over the course of the year. He was easily the best player on that Astralis team. And even though Astralis wasn't, great all the time, they were in a playoff race up until the final week of the season. And that's huge for an organization that was so disastrous just a couple of months ago. They couldn't even win a game. They were, 1-17 just a couple of months ago. And so, for Jonghoon to come in and really be able to invigorate a lot of what this team wanted to do, I think is really, really positive for Astralis. And it's also his aggressive play style. Like, it's his ability to go out and make plays. It's, wanting to play the Rakan, wanting to play the Pyke, the signature pick that he would pull out. His Tahm Kench is better than almost any Tahm Kench I've seen in a very long time. In terms of lane pressure and in terms of map pressure, just his ability to be able to make plays across the map, be able to engage, be able to be that guy, that aggressive, playmaker in the support position for Astralis, I think was huge this year. I would very much expect him to not be on Astralis next year. That would be my guess. Obviously, he comes over here. He's a rookie. Not a lot of people know about him. Astralis does a great job scouting down in LCK Challengers on a bad Fred Brion Challengers team to find Jonghoon, to bring him over here, give him that opportunity to play in the LEC, and he really rewards them. And quite frankly, I think he'll reward them more than just his performance. I think he will probably reward them with quite a significant buyout this offseason, because I don't expect there's not going to be a lot of the top teams in both the LEC and the LCS probably calling up Astralis looking to get Jonghoon on their team. He just is not a low-tier player. Like, he's not going to be a player that's going to be playing for non-playoff teams his whole career. He is too good for that, and so I would expect him to be able to make Astralis quite a bit of money this offseason. You can see I only put one honorable mention, though, for Rookie of the Split, and that was Irrelevant. Usually I'd put 2 here, but really Irrelevant was the only other Rookie of the Split, like, actual summer rookie that I think had any claim to be on this list at all. Irrelevant was really good towards the back half of the split. Not as good as Jonghoon. I think Jonghoon really took over his team, but Irrelevant showed a lot of really interesting things. Now, if it were Rookie of the Year, a few things would change here. It would not be Jonghoon in this spot. I don't think a lot of people would even argue that. It would pretty obviously be Unforgiven. I don't think a lot of people would really argue that Unforgiven was the best rookie here in 2022. But again, he played in spring. He won the award in spring, so he's not allowed to come in and win it again in summer. I get it. I don't understand why there's an award in spring and in summer, but it is what it is. If it was Rookie of the Year, it would be Unforgiven. Other people that I think fell off this list because of that, Flakked for G2, I think is a pretty obvious one. And then also Mursa for Misfits as well. I think all 3 of those players probably would have been either in the top 3 or close to it. Jonghoon probably would have been in there as well. But unfortunately for Unforgiven, he's not eligible for the award. Unfortunately for Jonghoon, he is. So for me, Jonghoon is my Rookie of the Split. There's really no one else that was even in consideration for that. Like I said, Irrelevant was close, but the amount that Jonghoon was able to take over was pretty extraordinary, and I imagine that he's going to be making teams happy wherever he is for quite a long time in League of Legends. He has a very, very fun playstyle, and I hope to see him in a major region again next year. All right, now that we've got the 2 solo awards done and dusted, we've got MVP and Rookie of the Split accounted for. It is time for the All-Pro teams. Now, I do this disclaimer at the beginning of all of my All-Pro team sections. I think I vote a little bit differently than a lot of the actual voters do. I tend to value your ability to make your team actively better and not just be a good player. Like, I can think that you are a better player than someone else and have you lower on the All-Pro scale, because I think your impact to this year is what should get you All-Pro votes, not necessarily, like, who do I think would win in a 1v1, right? Like, that's more of what I go for there. As well as, I think you often see a lot of team favoritism towards a lot of the top players in the All-Pro voting, whether it be, you know, the best teams really only having higher, you know, people, even if they weren't all that impactful. We can look at the LPL for that, where really all 3 of the All-Pro teams are just the top 4 teams, even if you can make a case that, you know, there are some other teams in the top 5 or 6 or 7 that really wouldn't be there without their players. That's the kind of thing I would like to acknowledge, is there are some players that are on here that aren't on top teams, and you can say, like, well, how is that possible? Well, without them, I think their teams would have completely fallen apart. That's my reasoning. So I tend to value the contribution that you as a player had to your team, not just the success of your team with you in it, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and kick off these All-Pro teams, starting with the best of the best, the top of the top here in the LEC, my first team All-Pro, and it is up on the screen now. We're going to be going over it from top to support here. In the top lane, I've got Broken Blade from G2 Esports. In the jungle, I've got Yankos from G2 Esports. In the mid lane, Niski from Mad Lions. In the bot lane, Unforgiven from Mad Lions. And at support, Kaiser from Mad Lions. Now, I know. I just put out this disclaimer where I was like, you don't have to be on a top team to make first team All-Pro. But these were the 5 best players in their roles. And it really wasn't all... I mean, some of them were a little bit close, but this to me was a pretty easy choice for first team All-Pro. Let's go over why I put all these people in here from top to support here, starting with Broken Blade in the top lane. Now, anybody who's followed the channel for any, you know, extended amount of time, you know, back last 2 or 3 years, knows that I've been relatively low on Broken Blade as a whole, going back to his days on TSM. I thought when he won that championship in 2020, it was really, you know, against him rather than for him. They found out in the playoffs that if they invested into Broken Blade, it could really work, but if he was left on an island and other teams invested in him, he could often be a huge hindrance towards that team. He felt very similarly for me on Schalke last year, comes over here to G2, is given significantly better teammates than he's been given in any other opportunity, but let's not underestimate his ability to, quite frankly, just get more consistent. That was always my problem with Broken Blade. It was never that the highs for him weren't high enough. When he was given resources and when he was invested in, he could always be the one to take over games. Even back on TSM where I thought he was the weakest version of himself, even then, he was always at his best when you invested in him, gave him gold, and he was able to take over in the late game. But it always felt like if he wasn't given that, he could often play like he was anyways and not get a lot of advantages from that. And so it's really been the consistency that's changed for him is the reason that I now trust him significantly more. That started in spring where he was very good. It's gotten even better here in summer where it really feels like every single game he's going to be an impact player in the later half. He's not going to throw away advantages. He's not going to overplay his hand quite like he used to. And I really think that's a huge positive for him. He does still make some mistakes in the top lane, but honestly, that's top lane. Like, that's what happens in the top lane. No top laner is going to be perfect when it comes to not dying in solo kills all the time, right? It's just going to happen. But I think Broken Blade has very much minimized a lot of those errors and maximized a lot of the positives that he gives the team. And so for me, he's a pretty easy choice here for first team top laner. In the jungle, I've got Yankos here. Now, this was a little bit of a dicey decision. We've got some players down on the second team, third team that I think could theoretically compete here for this first team slot. But for me, no one really controlled the game from the jungle position quite like Yankos did. I don't think that was quite, all that debatable. Even someone like Elyoya that I think a lot of people are going to want to see in this spot. I think had his moments throughout the season where he just couldn't quite control the map and control the objectives and really control the pacing in the way that he wanted to. That was certainly not a problem with Jankos, where I really think he took over the game and controlled it more than anybody else in the region with the inclusion of the MVP there. So Jankos to me definitely deserves first team. He's the best jungler in the LEC, and I think he proved that day in and day out here for G2 this year. We've already talked quite a bit about Nisqy in the mid lane, but just quickly, completely turned his career around. Mad Lions ran pretty much everything through him, whether it be maybe not resources, but like Elyoya and Nisqy were the duo. Nisqy followed around Elyoya. If Nisqy was there, they were getting an objective. If Nisqy was in the bottom lane, they were getting a kill. Wherever he was, Mad Lions was gaining a positive interaction, and that's more than I can say for pretty much any player in the world in terms of the impact that they had on the success of their team. And so Nisqy, for me, obviously MVP choice, pretty easy choice for first team All-Pro. You've got Unforgiven here in the bottom lane, another player that I definitely think deserves a lot of credit for Mad Lions' success. I just don't know if there is a better team fighter in the region than Unforgiven. His consistency to be able to win the game if he's given the resources is unbelievable, and that's another take that I was just wrong about. I was very down on Unforgiven, or at least more skeptical on someone like Unforgiven coming into the LEC. I just didn't see it in the ERLs, but basically from game one in spring, he has proven that he is the guy, and he is absolutely ready to be one of the best AD carries in the LEC for a very long time, and it's been very, very clear to see. So big congratulations to Unforgiven, a very good year from him and a very clear first-team All-Pro. And then Kaiser. I think you can make the case that, obviously, Kaiser wasn't the most flashy support this year, but really the impact that he had on the team was pretty noticeable. He doesn't have the most player of the games or anything like that, but Mad Lions really was a pretty stacked team overall, and I think if you go back and watch the tape, which obviously I've done quite a bit of going over these awards, there really just wasn't a support that had the same level of map impact and consistent success that Kaiser had, whether it be with Unforgiven, having someone like Nisqy and Elyoya come down, or being able to roam with Nisqy and Elyoya to make plays around the map and really be able to confuse the enemy jungler consistently. Kaiser did a phenomenal job of that. He will continue to do a phenomenal job of that. He's been the best support in the West all year long. Sorry, Core JJ, but it's been Kaiser all year long, and I think he definitely continued that here in summer. But overall, most of these choices were pretty simple, and I know it kind of goes against my saying that a lot of these are on top teams, but a lot of these players, I should say, are on top teams, but really, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of argument to be made that these were the 5 best players in their roles in summer. Here's the congratulations. This was a pretty easy choice for me overall. Moving on now to our second team All-Pro. This one's definitely going to be a little bit more controversial than the first team, where I think a lot of people are going to agree with a lot of those choices, but second team I think is a little more debatable, and it is going to be up on the screen right now. Let's go over again, top to support, who we've got here on the second team All-Pro in the LEC. We've got Wunder in the top lane on Fnatic. In the jungle, I've got Elyoya from Mad Lions. In the mid lane, Perks from Team Vitality. In the bot lane, Comp from Rogue. And at the support position, Jonghoon from Astralis. Definitely some interesting choices here. 2 teams that didn't even make playoffs. Get players represented here in the second team, but I'll definitely explain it a bit. Let's start in the top lane, though, with Wunder on Fnatic. Now, a lot of people are going to be shocked to see Wunder this high because he certainly had bad games this split. That's definitely not all that surprising to hear. Fnatic went on a huge losing streak towards the middle of the year, and Wunder was definitely a part of that. But I think there's a real case to be made for Wunder that his best, like his highs in terms of the season, his best games were better than anybody in that role by a considerable margin. Like when he was playing well, he was easily the best top laner in the region, and I don't even think it was all that close. Really, the reason that he falls down here to second team and is not in first team is because of the consistency, because he didn't have a lot of the same kind of impact games, from behind that someone like Broken Blade had. But I really think when you talk about the major impact that Wunder had on the game in his wins, that could be put up against pretty much any top laner in the world in terms of impact on his team in particular, and I think you could really stand that up. Wunder was phenomenal this year for Fnatic when he was good. When he was bad, not so much, and that's the reason he falls down here to second team and is not on first team, where it really feels like he should be for how he played for a lot of the year. But Wunder, again, played really well, even if Fnatic wasn't always there to back him up. He's got his signature picks and really made use of them in this split. In the jungle, I've got Elyoya a lot of people are going to want to see Elyoya in first team probably over Yankos, but for me, I think Yankos definitely did a better job of enabling a lot of his lanes, where Elyoya, I think, was definitely, I don't want to say spoon-fed a little bit more, but I think he had a lot more options, whether it be Niski often roaming with him or Kaiser often roaming with him. Just something that, quite frankly, Yankos didn't have for a majority of the year, but even outside of that, Elyoya had significantly more games where I was questioning his pathing and questioning his decision-making. I really didn't have a lot of those games for Yankos, so for me, Elyoya falls down here to second team, but it's really not a slight on him. Second team is still very, very good. He's the number 2 jungler in the region. Can't really be all that bad. He really was able to take over a lot of the games. Like I said, Mad Lions end up dumping a lot of resources into him, and he really paid off for them in a lot of these games, especially during their really big win streak towards the middle of the year here. Elyoya was a big reason for that, and I definitely think he deserves to be either first or second team. Just for me, he falls a little bit below Yankos in terms of the overall contribution that he had to the season. In the mid lane, I've got Perks. Now, this is a little bit of a controversial pick, but it really shouldn't be. Perks was so freaking good all year long. Like I said in my MVP conversation, if he hadn't completely thrown away the last week of the season, if they had won basically a single game in the final week of the season, not gone 0-4, I think Perks probably would have been the MVP of the season because they'd be in playoffs and they'd be in a good spot. Like, overall, he just had to not completely shit the bed, and unfortunately he did. But the final week of the season does not determine how you played the entire season up until that point. And I think Summer Split was a real coming out party again for Perks here, where Vitality was not really all that good and all that consistent, especially in that bot lane. They had a lot of problems in the jungle, just a lot of consistency issues. Even Alfari would sometimes just throw his leads, but Perks all year long was the guy dragging the corpse of Team Vitality across the finish line and very nearly made them one of the top teams in the LEC. So for me, it was a pretty easy decision to put Perks in second team. A lot of people are going to want to see him lower, but what a phenomenal season from him. He's going to dominate pretty much every single statistic in the LEC, especially when it comes to laning stats, and he absolutely deserved it, and it shows, like, on film. It's not just like, he won lane and then didn't do anything with it. He was often being the one to make those major plays towards the back half. So, recency bias aside, Perks definitely deserves to be on the All-Pro teams and very high on the All-Pro teams. It's just unfortunate that he couldn't come in on the first team. He's got to fall down here to the second team. But moving on to the bot lane, we've got Comp here. What an awesome year for Comp. What a complete career rejuvenation Comp had. We were talking about him, and I was talking about him as someone who was getting too many chances in the LEC. He had been given quite a few chances on Vitality with what I thought was a very good lane partner there on Vitality, and they really wasn't able to make use of it. Him and Lebrov had a couple of really good splits and then just weren't able to push forward. They were never able to take that step up. They were never able to completely unlock, so much so that he got replaced by Crown Shot towards the back half of last year, someone who doesn't even have an LEC spot, couldn't even win an LEC spot over X-Matty. So, yeah, I wasn't super high on Comp going into the year. I thought it was a really bad move to go from Hansama to Comp. I thought that was a big downgrade, but honestly, this team has looked significantly better with Comp than they did with Hansama in terms of a complete package. His ability to not lose, I think, is pretty underrated in the grand scheme of things. Really, what he does is just give them the most consistent laning threat that they possibly could. He plays with Trimby, who wants to play a little bit more aggro. He's fine taking the backseat. He's fine playing a little bit more of these scaling picks or playing something that's just going to be there to poke. He doesn't really have to play all that aggro, and then he can get to the late game and be really consistent. He's never really going to be out of position. He's also never really going to completely take over games. Really, what Comp gives you is just that guy that you can really trust. I'm thinking like peak Wild Turtle of that, like, you know that he's going to be there in the late game. You know he's not going to screw up. You know he's going to do everything he needs to do. He's not going to be the most flashy player in the world, but he is going to be consistent, and I think Comp really gives you that and really unlocked a lot for Rogue this year, and it was a real positive for them. So Comp definitely deserves to be second team here. And then Jonghoon. Already talked about him quite a bit here on the Rookie of the Split conversation. Astralis is nothing without Jonghoon this year. I don't mean to be that guy, but, like, he really was, like, a Jonghoon difference between easy, complete 10th place last split and actually competing for playoffs up until the last week of the season here. Like, he was that important for this team. Like I said, I do not expect him to be on Astralis come next year. He's going to earn them a pretty penny with the buyout pretty much wherever he goes, but he is just simply too good of a player to be missing playoffs consistently. He was amazing for Astralis, somebody who is willing to take risks and is willing to push the game forward. I would expect him to really dominate whatever league he's in for the next few years because he just has that mentality to do so, and he has the mechanical skill to back it up. Even if those risks sometimes don't always pay off, it definitely is still worth it for him. So that is my second team All-Pro here in the LEC. Some controversial picks, some picks that I think a lot of people are going to agree with, but definitely ones that I'm going to stick to here. Now that we've done the first two, it is time to get to our third and final all-team, I guess, here. Third team All-Pro in LEC Summer of 2022, and it is going to be up on the screen right now. Going from top to support, we were looking at, in the top lane, Odoamne from Rogue. In the jungle, Marcoon from Excel. In the mid lane, VTO from Misfits Gaming. In the bot lane, Upset from Fnatic. And at the support position, Targamas from G2 Esports. There are definitely going to be some controversial picks, both good and bad here, so let's go ahead and start with the top lane. Odoamne does narrowly make my third team All-Pro. There were moments in the season where Odo was Odo, and he looked really solid and was really consistent. And then there were moments in the season where he wasn't all that good, and, you know, I definitely think this was a little bit of an up and down split for Odoamne, but at the end of the day, he still was a huge net positive for Rogue, and that to me gets him this third team All-Pro spot. I don't think it was all guaranteed. In fact, honestly, I think a lot of people are going to want to see someone like Genax here, and I don't even hate that. Like, Genax was shockingly good for SK and was honestly the biggest reason that they went on that huge burst later in the season. Obviously, Certus was really good, but Genax was like the guy for SK Gaming towards the back half of the split that I don't think a lot of people are going to be talking about. He narrowly misses out on my third team All-Pro here, but I just couldn't justify putting Genax over Odoamne, especially because Genax really had some games to split that weren't all that good, even if when he won very hard. I still think Odo was overall a more productive member of his team, and so for me, Odo makes third team. This is the lowest I've put him in quite a long time in terms of All-Pro voting, and that should really show you how good Odo's been for Rogue. Last year, he was pretty clearly the best top laner in the LEC. I think you could make the same case going into this split, but for me, he falls down here to third team just because of a few games throughout the split that just weren't all that perfect. Like I said, definitely deserves to be here in third team, but it wasn't all that certain for me, especially when SK was going on their big run. Genax was definitely someone that I was considering putting on this list, but Odo ends up making it here for third team. In the jungle, I have Marcoon here from Excel. This was a pretty easy choice for me. I think a lot of people are going to forget how good Marcoon was for a majority of this year just because of the disaster that was the back half of the season for Excel, but Marcoon was still really, really good for this Excel team. Even when they were bad, it was often not his fault. He was often not getting out jungled. It was just his laners getting crazy behind. Most of the time his support making really bonehead plays, or his top laner making really bonehead plays and putting him in a position where he really just couldn't recover from that. And I still think that he is a very good player. And in my opinion, he's still a top 2 to 3 jungler in the region. Like, he is just so ridiculously talented. I expect him to be near the All-Pro standings for quite a long time. And, his placement here, even after Excel basically nosedived towards the back half of the split, should really show you how highly I think of Marcoon as a player. I think without Marcoon, Excel is really looking at a much different season because I don't think there was a lot of salvageable parts outside of him in terms of the consistency throughout the season. Yes, Year of the Duck was great. We'll talk about Patrick in a bit, but Marcoon was like the guy that I think was hyper consistent for Excel this year, even in their losses. And I think it really shows in a lot of their games. And so for me, pretty easy choice for third team All-Pro. Really not a lot of other people that I was considering for this role. In the mid lane, I think a lot of people are going to be shocked to see VTO. Some people are going to be shocked to see him this low. Some people are going to be shocked to see him at all because what this essentially means is no caps. And I think a lot of people are going to be really upset that there's no caps in any of my All-Pro teams. But let me explain VTO first, and then I will get to caps. Do I really have to explain VTO? Like, what is Misfits Gaming without VTO? A little bit less this split than it was last split when they were dominant and VTO was clearly the MVP of Spring. He was still really good this split, and he was still the focal point of Misfits Gaming, but I think you had a lot more players start to step up around him. I think players like Irrelevant in the top lane, a player like Mursa really came into his own in this split. I think VTO had significantly more help, and I think that really meant that he had a lot of the load taken off of him throughout the course of this split. It means he didn't necessarily have to be that hyper carry all the time, and that kind of means that some of his highlight reels also went down a bit, and that's why he falls down to third team. While he was an extremely influential member of Misfits, I do think that there were significantly more games this split than there were last split, where he just wasn't all that good or where he got outplayed when he went up against a player like Caps or when he went up against a player like Perks. he definitely had some problems in those matchups, and you could definitely see it, although he really, really styled on the worst teams in the league. It was very, very fun to watch VTO go up against bad teams. It was just a little bit more concerning to see him have trouble against some of the top teams, more so than he did last split. So he does fall from what was pretty much the unanimous MVP last split down to third team for me. Let's talk about why Caps isn't here. I think a lot of people are looking at Caps as recency bias, and as the last 3 or 4 weeks where he was overall a very good player. Maybe not the most important player on that G2 team, but overall a very, very good player for G2. And they're forgetting that there was a point at around like week 3 where this team was sitting at like 2-4 or 3-4 around there, and Caps was like the reason they lost every single one of those games. I think there is a lot of recency bias in that respect. He was really bad at the beginning of the year. There's really no other way to say it. Like, at the beginning of summer, Caps was not even close. He really rehabilitated his image, kind of came into his own, got a little bit more focused after MSI here. But man, like the beginning of the split really took Caps out of the All-Pro team. And making All-Pro in the mid lane position is not easy. I just don't think you can really make the case that Caps was more influential to his team's win-loss record this year than VTO was. Because while VTO had some bad games and definitely attributed to some losses for Misfits, I think Caps attributed to more losses for G2. So even if they were equally as good and equally as important in their wins, I think Caps was worse in their losses. And so for me, VTO gets the nod here, although a lot of people are going to be mad about that. This isn't a statement on Caps. I still think he's the best mid in the LEC, but there were just some games that caused me to take him off the list. Moving into the bottom lane, you've got Upset here, and shout out Upset. He's a good player. He really kind of rehabilitated his image in a way towards the back half of the split, kind of what Caps was doing, but Upset succeeded in doing it, where I think the final week of the split really secured his spot on the All-Pro team for me. He had always been really consistent for Fnatic throughout the year, but I definitely think there were some concerning parts of his game, mostly the fact that he just couldn't drag Fnatic to win sometimes, even if he was on late game hyper carries and they were investing in him, but he really did step up towards the back half, especially in the last week of the season, where Fnatic very likely does not make playoffs without Upset. And he really, really did step up and be the guy for this team. Patrick was very close to making the All-Pro team for me, but unfortunately he falls out here because of Upset's dominant week. If you wanted to put Patrick here in third team, I wouldn't be all that mad, but for me, Upset is going to make the role here. And then Targamas here, I think some people are going to want to see him higher. I really think, and I'll say this, the top 4 in terms of supports in the LEC are really inseparable to me in terms of their performance this year, whether it be Kaiser, Jonghoon, Targamas, and then Mursa on Misfits. I think all 4 of them were all so good that if you wanted to put them in any sort of order, like if you wanted Targamas at 1 and Kaiser at 2 and Mursa at 3, Jonghoon off the list, like I would understand, right? Like Jonghoon had some bad games where he was over-aggressive and where he's punished. If you wanted, someone like Kaiser off the list because really like all he did was kind of support his jungler and the jungler should get more credit for that, I would kind of understand that. I think Mursa, Targamas, and Jonghoon had more direct impacts on their team's success. So really, I think the top 4 are all kind of mismatchable. I think they're all kind of, you can switch and swap them out wherever you want. Targamas does fall at number 3 for me because truly, like, he had a phenomenal year. Like, there's really no way to take that away. I don't think he's as influential as his stats would incline in terms of G2's wins. But I do think he was a very good player, even if this bot lane wasn't super consistent all year long for G2. I definitely think he deserves it. Like I said, Mursa is definitely an honorable mention here. Was pretty much on my All-Pro team all year long until the last week, but I just couldn't justify leaving Targamas off, even if I felt like the bot lane for G2 was significantly overrated in the grand scheme of things. But overall, these are my choices for third team. Where did I go right? Where did I go wrong for all the award selections? Let me know down in the comment section below. There are people left off this that people are going to be upset about, people that are on this that people don't agree with. Who's your MVP pick, your Rookie of the Year pick, your Rookie of the Split pick, all of that. Leave all that down in the comments section below. You know I love chatting it up with you guys. But yeah, that is going to do it for my awards section of the video. Now it is time to move on to our matchup previews here in the playoffs. All right, now that our awards section is done and dusted, we can move on to our first round playoff matchup previews here. Definitely some interesting ones to talk about that I'm very excited about. And we kick off our LEC playoff journey here with the upper bracket series between our 2 and 3 seeds. Kind of mixed up here a little bit because of the way LEC does it, but we've got the 2-seeded Rogue taking on the 3-seeded Mad Lions. Now, definitely an intriguing matchup here. Mad Lions actually finished the regular season in second place. Rogue finished the regular season in third place, but because LEC does order summer playoffs based off championship points, Rogue is actually going to get side selection for this matchup, which could be a very important thing for them. Obviously, we've definitely seen one of the sides be a little bit better than the other throughout the playoffs, but overall, I don't think it's going to matter all that much. This is a really intriguing matchup. Rogue actually took both of the matchups in the regular season. A lot of that was just on the fact of Odoamne was really good and Comp was super consistent for this team. I don't know if I honestly see this matchup being Rogue favored in the grand scheme of things, but it definitely is interesting that Rogue was able to take both of these games and at different times of the year too. One where Rogue really was surging and one where Mad Lions was definitely in a better position. So definitely a little interesting to see that, but overall, let's talk about how these two teams play and how they can match up against each other in that respect. For Rogue, this team very much likes to play around jungle. Maorang is definitely the guy for Rogue that wants to get the early pressure going. Larson, Comp, they're more passive players that I think would like to scale a little bit later. Obviously, we've seen Larson have a little bit of trouble this year playing the more supportive picks. Talia, most notably, has simply just not been a pick that he's been all that good on, and it really has not helped Rogue out all that much when he's played it. So I expect to see him go to those more late game carries, the Azir, even something like the Ahri or the Sylas, which can still really help out, but does offer you a little bit more potential around the back half of the game. I think that significantly fits Larson's playstyle better, and I would expect them to go to that. Most notably, the Azir, I would expect to be a pick that this team rolls with over and over again in the mid lane, but Maorang likes to play those early game aggressive junglers. You want to talk about the Wukong, you want to talk about the Vi, you want to talk about the Trundle. Things that he can really fight on in the early game, create plays for the rest of his team, and then have them really do a lot of the heavy lifting towards the back half. That is a strategy that really worked for them a lot in spring, and they've kind of carried it over here to summer. It worked a bit, and then the laners just got a little bit more sloppy. I think someone like an Odoamne was getting a little bit sloppier in the top lane. Trimby was dying a little bit more in the bot lane, creating some weird advantages. So I think overall, they do want to still go to that play style of scale into the late game, have Larson and Comp on these two late game carries, whether it be the Azir, whether it be the Ahri for Larson, whether it be the Sivir, whether it be the Zeri, even something like the Ezreal that he pulls out quite a bit for Comp. There are a lot of options here. And they can play around bot lane. Like, I'm not going to say that it's impossible. The Lucian Nami is something that they have pretty consistently shown that they are at least willing to play here. And I think Trimby definitely plays that lane well. I think Comp maybe plays it a little bit too passive on the Lucian to be consistent on it. But overall, I like what Rogue likes to do, which is kind of just scale into the late game and really team fight their way out of a lot of situations. Mad Lions is definitely different. They thrive on early to mid game aggression. They also like to play around their early game jungler here in Elyoya, who does like to pick up the Wukong, the Vi, the Trundle, things like that in a very similar respect to Maorang, but their mid lane situation is almost completely different here. Whereas Larson, I think, is a player who likes to play for his own lane, likes to scale up, maybe isn't quite as aggressive. Niski is the opposite. Niski does not want to be in lane. He will be in lane as little as possible. He wants to be with Elyoya trying to make plays to get the Gwen or the Gangplank or whatever ahead in the top lane. He wants to be around Dragon Pit with Kaiser to be able to activate a fight, or with Unforgiven on his signature Draven pick. Like, there are a lot of differences, I think, in how these two teams play, even if, like, the identity of them are relatively similar. To me, this favors Mad Lions. I think the early aggression, especially in this meta, and especially with Niski on these roaming playmakers creating numbers advantages in a lot of the other parts of the game, I think should theoretically be a Mad Lions favored matchup. You should be getting number advantages in fights bot lane. You should be able to get numbers advantages in fights in the, around objectives. Typically, you're going to be getting early prio to a lot of those anyways. I do think it is a little bit of an interesting matchup in terms of players, where you want to talk about, a player like Unforgiven going into Comp should be better. But on the other end, a player like Arma going into Odoamne, we've seen Arma get, quite frankly, abused by very good top laners so far throughout this year. I actually think Arma's had a shockingly bad year for Mad Lions, considering how good this team has been. But it's all going to come down, in my opinion, to the key matchup of the series, which for me is actually in the bot lane. That's going to be Comp versus Unforgiven. Both of these teams really like to pour resources into their bot laners, but in different ways. I think you can see that in how the stats kind of break down, where Comp is first in KP percentage, pretty high in KDA. He definitely likes to be involved in a lot of the plays they make, even if he's not the focal point. He plays a little bit more of that passive role, kind of being that more supportive style AD that is willing to make plays, but is definitely more so looking to kind of just go even and scale up into the late game, help his team out. whereas Unforgiven is the resource guy. He's first in gold difference at 15, fifth in damage percentage, fifth in KD. Like, he's definitely the guy that you want to give resources to. Now, it's a little bit more risky with Unforgiven because he does play a little bit more aggressive in lane, and sometimes, obviously, the resources can be away from him, and then he still sometimes doesn't back off. But at the end of the day, they do a really good job of feeding into him and making him a very strong player. I think if Unforgiven can get a definite lead in this series, Mad should have an advantage. Comp from behind, well, he isn't all that bad. Rogue's game plan kind of falls apart just a tad bit. On the flip side, if Unforgiven really isn't able to scale into that late game and Comp is definitely able to be a little bit more even, I think with how he plays, maybe a little bit more proactive across the map with how he plays, I think Rogue could actually be in a really good spot to maintain their late game dominance that I think they've had for a majority of their split, especially during the good times. So I definitely think that this bot lane matchup is super important in my key matchup of the series, but overall, it's going to be a very intriguing series to watch between both of these teams, and I'm just excited that we're getting it in the first round. All right, moving on to our second upper bracket first round series here in the LEC. We talked about the 2-3 matchup. That leaves the 1-4 matchup here between G2 Esports and Misfits Gaming. Certainly an interesting matchup. We actually saw this one relatively recently, and so we got a little bit of an idea of how these things go. They did trade 1-1 in the regular season, but G2 definitely dominated the most recent of those affairs. Let's talk about how both of these teams like to play, and then kind of talk about how that matches up against each other. Well, G2 just kind of plays however they want. They don't really have a set play style. They really go game to game depending on what they feel like they can take advantage of in draft. A lot of times it's Yankos playing aggressive, not so much in the mid game, but more so in the late game, like really being the one to push the tempo and force a lot of plays, whether it be around objectives or whatever. Yankos is definitely kind of the flag bearer, I think, for the tempo that G2 wants to set. And I think everybody else on the team is kind of okay with following whatever that tempo is. Even if they're behind in the early game, oftentimes Yankos can really get them back in the game. Obviously, Caps does a very similar thing here. They're phenomenal team fighters, but where they send their resources has honestly been kind of scattered, more so than pretty much any team that I've talked about, whether it be in the LCS, LCK, or the LPO. Throughout the year, they really don't have a one lane that they like to play for more than the others. Oftentimes, it is one of the solo lanes, whether that be Broken Blade or Caps, but both have received a lot of resources at different points this year. Really what they want to do is just take advantage of whatever matchup they feel is the most exploitable in that game in particular. It makes them very versatile, and it honestly makes them very difficult to predict. And I think that that is a huge benefit for G2. Now, the one thing I will say is oftentimes they don't like to invest a lot of resources into their bottom lane. They do when they get the Draven, which is something that they have gone to a couple of times throughout the year, but outside of that, when they get the Sivir, when they get the Zeri, things like that, they just don't like to invest a lot of those resources down into Flakked. Now, that can be good, but that can also be bad because we're in a very ADC-heavy meta right now where picks like Sivir, picks like Zeri, picks like Draven can be very dominant and can really take over the game. And oftentimes, if the other team is willing to invest into that significantly more than you are, you can put yourself in a little bit of an interesting position. But if you can get that advantage back when you get your solo lanes kind of rocking and rolling, oftentimes for G2, that really hasn't mattered all that much this year. So just because they don't invest in the bot lane doesn't mean that's necessarily a problem. Outside of that, I think for Misfits, it's VTO, VTO, VTO. That's the game plan. He's really been the guy. A lot of times it's on carries, but sometimes it's on roaming threats too. He can play, Sylas really, really well. He can play the Taliyah really, really well. Obviously, they've now added Zanzara into the mix here. He's definitely got his own champion pool, which you can kind of see there. Obviously, a lot of Poppy, but Trundle, Skarner, Volibear, things like that. We know Zanzara can play that. I think that's definitely upgraded this team a significant amount. Not to say that Zlatan was a bad player, but I think the opportunities that Zanzara gives you are just significantly more. And then I think, obviously, this team has a little bit more of a propensity to play through not only their mid lane, but their bot lane. They like to play through Neon. They like to play through Mersa. They like to put Neon on carries that can be a little bit more strong in the late game. Things like the Sivir, things like the Aphelios are definitely things that I look out for from Neon. Whereas I think a lot of AD carries are definitely more early game focused right now. Neon is one of those players that I think is definitely more LCK style, where he just wants to farm out that early game, and he's going to position himself relatively well in the late game to do a lot of damage. He likes to play these late game carries, even if his early game pressure isn't all that high. But Mersa does a great job of counteracting that. He likes to play aggressive threats, but he plays the Renata pretty much better than anybody in the LEC, and that's been shown over and over again. His pressure in lane has been phenomenal, and really one of the best laning supports in the region. I don't even think that's all up for debate here. I think you can put him right up there with, you know, the Jonghoons and even someone like a Trimby, where I just think the lane pressure that he offers is phenomenal. And I would honestly, I think you could maybe argue that you could take him over either of those two with how he's played for a majority of this year. But like I said, it all runs through VTO at the end of the day. He's the one that they're going to want to give the resources to. If he wants to distribute those resources to other lanes, great. If he doesn't, great. Whatever happens with VTO, that's where Misfits goes. So that's their game plan. What does that mean for the matchup here? Well, I honestly don't love this matchup for Misfits. I talked about this a little bit in the Week 8 review, but I don't know if there's a worse matchup for Misfits in the LEC than G2 Esports, mostly because they just counter a lot of what Misfits wants to do. They want to invest in their mid laner really heavily. Well, oops, now you're going into the best mid laner in the region. Yes, he can sometimes play a little over aggro, but Jankos is perfectly fine shadowing him for a majority of the early game, giving up resources to do so. And you also have a situation in the top lane where I think Broken Blade can really get an advantage over someone like Irrelevant. Yes, Irrelevant I think has been very good as this weak side tank player that has really been super successful on that role, but Broken Blade has been able to beat down some weak side top laners in the season here. So I definitely think that if Jankos wants to invest into that top side, I certainly think that could definitely be a Broken Blade favored matchup. Even if I do see the bot lane as potentially Misfits favored if things go right. I think it's definitely more up in the air there, but it's definitely something that I would at least consider. But that brings us to our key matchup of the series, which for me, no shock to pretty much anybody, is going to be the mid lane matchup here. Caps versus VTO. Misfits completely runs through VTO. Caps is the mid laner here in the LEC, whether or not he showed it in every game or not. VTO has just been, he's been the guy for Misfits. He was in spring. He was a little bit again in summer. Like I said, it definitely dropped off significantly more than it was in spring, but that doesn't mean they still didn't love playing through him. I certainly think if VTO is rocking and rolling, Misfits is in a good spot, and there's very few teams in the league that are able to beat that. And I think G2 showed that when they lost to them earlier in the year, when VTO got rolling, like in that lane. Even someone like Caps and Jankos weren't able to really shut that down. And so I do think that Misfits does have a chance here. It's just going to be very, very difficult going into what is the best jungle mid duo in the region here, and Jankos and Caps. And, you know, Caps' stats, I think, look a little bit better here, but I think it doesn't tell the full story. Caps really rehabilitated his image, like I said, over the last half of the year. And I think that's good for G2 going into this playoff series. He's looking a lot better. He's looking a lot more locked in. G2 has always been a team that looks better in high-pressure scenarios than they do in games that don't matter. So I expect to see Caps, you know, being really good here. But like I said, if VTO is in a position where he can take over the game, I don't necessarily think that Misfits is all out of this. I certainly think VTO is a good enough player to be able to carry some wins. He's just going to have to do it for 3 separate games against G2, which is a pretty heavy ask. But either way, I think it's going to be a very fun series here. I think it's a very good draw for G2. They've got to be happy to get it. Misfits is definitely going to have to step up, but it's definitely possible, and they've already beaten the expectations by getting top 4. They could probably do it again here. Now we've got our third and final round 1 series, this time in the lower bracket. We've got our 5-6 matchup that I'm very interested to talk about between Fnatic and Excel. And what an intriguing matchup here. Obviously, both teams basically barely making it into the playoffs here. Fnatic going on a huge 3-0 run in the final week of the season to get themselves to 10-8. They don't win the tiebreaker to get themselves into upper bracket, but they still put themselves in a pretty good position here. And Excel, after a pretty disastrous end of the season, at least in terms of like week 6 to week 7. Week 8 was a lot better for them. They went 2-1. They were able to win the tiebreaker to get themselves into playoffs over Vitality, which is huge. If this team missed playoffs with the amount of money I suspect they're spending on their roster, that would have been insane. You could say the same thing for Vitality not making playoffs, but they're not here. We're not talking about them. Let's talk about how these two teams like to play. For Fnatic, it's a little bit back and forth. A lot of their strategy really is just like, well, hope top and bot win. Which can work. It really can work. Razork is just really slow to the punch a lot of the times. When he has good games, Fnatic looks genuinely phenomenal, but overall, it's just not all that consistent out of Razork, and that means that Wonder and Upset are kind of on their own to create their own leads. They're good enough players to be able to do that relatively consistently, but it is really on them. I think a lot of times Wonder will get attention in the top lane, and that's good. I think overall for Fnatic, if Razork wants to go up and give him attention, that's good, but he can't really do it all that early because in the mid lane, you've got Humanoid, who is, obviously he's been a great mid laner for quite a long time in the LEC. In my opinion, overrated. I've talked about that for, 2-3 years now. I think Humanoid has never really been a channel darling, you could say, and I think he's definitely starting to show that this year. If he's not protected by his jungler consistently, he's gonna die to that level 3 gank. It is the most consistent thing in the world right now in terms of League of Legends action, that if Humanoid does not die, if he dies at level 3, he loses. If he does not die at level 3, he wins. And so you just gotta hope that he doesn't throw away the game at points. But, that's Humanoid. And then Upset and Hilly, they've definitely been a little bit different this year. Hilly, man, we'll talk about this with Mickey as well. Hilly has looked really bad for a majority of this split, I think, and it's really made Upset look worse. Upset's been a really good late game carry when he can get to the late game and be relatively even with the opposing AD carry, but so many times Hilly just runs it in laning phase and gives the enemy ADC so much gold to the point where Upset just has to play from super far behind the whole game to no fault of his own. And that's really frustrating to watch, but like I said, Fnatic really relies on Upset getting to that late game spot, and Wonder being what is easily the best team fighting top laner in the region. If he gets there on his Gragas, on his Ornn, even on the Gwen, even on the Sejuani, whatever, right? If he can get to that part ahead or even, he is so dominant at keeping people alive and peeling and frontlining and being a top laner that it's actually absurd. Wonder does such a great job of getting there that investing resources into him has quite often been very fruitful. And if he can do that, really Wonder and Upset have shown that they can 2v8 a lot of games, even if Razork, Humanoid, and Hylissang aren't all that good. So that's really been what Fnatic has wanted to go to for a majority of the year. As for Excel, it's been back and forth. I think obviously Patrick and Mickey is the lifeblood of this team in the bottom lane. Patrick is the guy in the late game that they want to run through, and Mickey is the one that they want to help get him there, but it just really hasn't been all that good recently. And again, I think very similarly to Fnatic, through no fault of the AD carry, Mickey has been so atrocious in just running it down in games over the last course of the season, very similar to Hylissang, that oftentimes you will see the enemy jungler or the enemy bot laner just have significantly more gold than their own bot laner without any sort of deaths on the bot laner because there's just not much they can do. Patrick just gets put into a really bad position. I do think that is a little bit more of the fault of someone like Nuke Duck than it is of someone like Humanoid, because truly he just doesn't have all that much pressure in the mid lane. He did at the beginning of the season. Honestly, Nuke Duck through the first 4 weeks was actually really good, but that all fell away. Finn, I think, has been really bad over the last course of the final games, and that's concerning in the top lane. I could definitely see Wonder being able to completely dominate that matchup, but again, through parts of the season, Finn was looking like the weak side king that he was on Rogue a couple of years ago, but we're definitely getting more of the CLG Finn towards the back half. And that just leaves Marcoon, who I do think has a pretty big advantage here in this jungle matchup. While Razork, I think, is definitely a little bit more passive with his pathing, Marcoon is definitely someone who likes to get those early game leads. He loves the Volibear, he loves the Trundle, he loves the Wukong. My biggest problem with Marcoon has been that he doesn't really play these champions that want to be a little bit more passive and don't have to fight in the early game. He is a skirmisher, and he is going to try to make those plays. That could be really good for Excel, and it has been over the course of the year. Excel is 2-0 against Fnatic, mostly off the back of Patrick being really good, but Marcoon just being able to out-jungle Razork. It's a really good matchup for Marcoon in general, and it's something I definitely think Excel is going to be able to exploit, but matchup-wise, it's definitely interesting. I think top lane could be super-duper in favor of Fnatic, almost to the point of series losing, but I think you could say the same thing about the jungle matchup for Excel. And then the mid lane matchup is super back and forth. I think bot laners are very similar. Where does that leave us? That leaves us with the two Int Kings of the split in the support position, Hylissang versus Mickey X, as my key matchup of the series. Both of them have, quite frankly, been so inconsistent that if one of them is consistent throughout this series, that team will probably win. If Hylissang runs it and Mickey can really find that form, maybe play a little bit more Yuumi where he's been more consistent, just give Patrick a chance to be able to take over in the late game, give Marcoon options to not have to play from behind, I think XL is going to be in a great spot. If Hylissang can do the same thing, give Upset the opportunities to win like he did in Week 8, maybe protect someone like a Humanoid a little bit more, give Wonder the opportunity to snowball the hell out of top lane and just be a problem in the late game, I think Fnatic's going to be in a really good spot. But both of these players have inted so much. They're 9th and 10th in KDA in terms of supports. They both, it just is what it is for this team. If one of these players can be hyper consistent, that's who's probably going to win the series. They're both super good. We know that Hylissang and Mickey are arguably two of the best supports that the LEC has ever seen. Maybe not arguably. Maybe they're just top two inarguably. You could put someone like a Yellow Star in there, but it really is like these two as like the GOATs of the LEC. if they can get that form back, like, this is going to be a super fun series to watch. But they really haven't had that form at all in summer of 2022, so it's really going to be about which one of these two can be more consistent. But I really think this is going to be the most interesting matchup of the first round, not only because it has the most implications, because the loser of this series doesn't go to loser's bracket like the upper series does. They're out. It is win or go home here for both of these teams. But outside of that, I think the matchup itself is the most interesting to watch. So very, very intrigued in the matchup between these two teams, and I'm going to be very excited to see what happens when these two face off. All right, that is going to do it for my round one previews and predictions for all three series that we are going to be getting, whether it be the upper bracket, whether it be the lower bracket. It also means my awards are done. That means there's only one part of the video left, my full bracket prediction here. Up on the screen right now, you're going to be seeing the bracket for the LEC. It's definitely an interesting one of the more intriguing ones, I think, in all of esports, but I'm going to be going over who I think is going to be winning in all of these series. I'll make a full bracket prediction going over who I think is going to be going to Worlds and who will be going as the 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever seeds from the LEC. So let's get it started here with our upper bracket series kicking off between G2 and Misfits. I detailed this a little bit in the preview, but I honestly think this is just a rotten matchup for Misfits. It's a very difficult one for them to win. A lot of their advantages come exactly where G2 is great at shutting down advantages. And for that, I think G2 should have a pretty big edge here. Misfits definitely has the opportunity to win a game, but I don't think that it will be all that competitive. This is probably the least competitive of the round one series, in my opinion. I think this should be a 3-0 or 3-1 for G2. Probably a 3-1. I could see Misfits definitely taking a game, but I don't expect it to really be all that close. G2 should definitely have the advantage here, and they should be able to move on to winners finals. But moving down, and I should note before we move to the rest of the games, if G2 does end up winning, that's probably the least interesting scenario of them all, because that actually auto-qualifies both Rogue and Mad Lions for Worlds. G2 is already qualified for Worlds because of the way the system works. Even if they were to lose in the first round, they would automatically be the higher seed in loser's bracket, and they would make top 4 in playoffs, and with LEC having extra seed this year, they automatically make Worlds. But if G2 wins, that does automatically qualify both Rogue and Mad Lions, because even the loser of that first series is still auto-qualified into top 4 because of how LEC playoff works. So, definitely, not the most interesting dynamics. If G2 wins, then Rogue or Mad don't even have to win a best of 5 to make Worlds, but it is what it is. I think they're the better team, and I think they'll move on. But moving on to Rogue versus Mad, I think this is a severely interesting matchup. Rogue has been able to take advantage of this in the regular season, but I just see this one as a little bit more Mad Lions favored. So I'm going to pick Mad here to win the matchup and move on to winners finals. They're just the better team overall, in my opinion. Not only that, but I actually think they do have a really good matchup into Rogue. I think Unforgiven and Kaiser should be able to deal with Comp and Trimby relatively well. And then Niski, I think, in this meta, being more of a proactive meta, is just going to be able to play with his jungler a little bit more than someone like Larson is able to. And I think Mad should have the advantage there. That means Rogue does move down. You can see Misfits moves down as well to the lower bracket. We're going to have some interesting matchups to talk about there, but in my opinion, I think G2 and Mad should be the first two to move on. I think this will go 4 or 5 games. I think Rogue should be able to win some games here. Malrang should be able to get some early games off, and they should be able to get to that late game where they want to get to. But overall, I think Mad should have the advantage. This should be a 4 or 5 game win for Mad, in my opinion. That brings us to loser's bracket, though. We've got Fnatic versus Excel. I talked about how this is the most interesting matchup in the first round, and I 100% stand by this. I think this goes 5 games, and I think it could go 5 games for both sides. I think Fnatic could win, I think Excel could win, but in the end, if I had to predict, I'm going to go with Fnatic. I think the top lane difference is pretty huge here, and I just have slightly more faith in Upset than I do in Patrick to be able to carry the late game here. Hylissang definitely showed a lot more in the back half of the season than someone like Mickey did, and I just have a little bit more faith in Fnatic's ability to pull this out. I do think this will be an incredibly close series. If Excel won this, I would not be surprised in any respect, but I'm going to have Fnatic in 5 games. I think it's going to be very, very close, but unfortunately for Excel, they're knocked out of playoffs. That brings us to our Worlds qualifying series here with G2, Rogue, and Mad all qualified. Who's going to go to LEC Worlds as the 4th seed? We've got Misfits versus Fnatic here, and for me, I'm going to go with Fnatic winning this series. I think this is a little bit of an upset, but we got a little bit of a glimpse of this in Week 8, where Fnatic won the game 1, Misfits won the tiebreaker game. I think Misfits, as long as they don't give up a lot of things in draft, could be in a good spot, but overall, I really like Wonder into Irrelevant as a matchup. Like I said, Wunder does a great job of kind of beating down the weak side Kings, playing super aggro and getting advantages on them. I think that could definitely happen against Irrelevant in that same respect. And honestly, I think the bot lane diff is just going to be too much. Upset, is really good, and I definitely think that he can get advantages on Neon, who Misfits honestly relies a lot on to win a lot of those late game team fights. So Fnatic is going to win this series. I think it could go to 5 games. This very well could be a 5-game set. I would going to say Fnatic in either 4 or 5, but potentially even Misfits in 5. Somewhere in that range, I think is probably what I'm going to predict, but I'm going to give the slight edge to Fnatic and have them qualify for Worlds here. Now, are they going to be going to Worlds as the 4th seed? Are they going to be going to Worlds as a higher seed than that? The 4th seed game here between Rogue and Fnatic, I have going in favor of Rogue. Fnatic's dream run ends here. They are going to make Worlds in my bracket prediction, which I think would be a miracle for how a lot of the season is played out, but they definitely have the talent to do so. Rogue is going to end the dream here, though. I think they're just simply the better team in the meta right now. I think Larssen is actually one of the few people that is really primed to take advantage of a lot of Hylissang's mistakes. If Larssen gets a lead, he's really able to translate that into the late game. Malrang as well does a really good job of punishing early mistakes, which Fnatic makes a lot of. And then the comp versus upset matchup I think is really interesting. Both players like to play it relatively safe early game, but Hylissang definitely has a tendency to run it a little bit more than someone like Trimby does. So I think it could be a really interesting matchup overall. You also get Wunder versus Odo in the top lane. Love that. It could be relatively close, but I see Rogue being able to take this in 4 or 5 games overall. And then we get our 2 semifinals here. We got winners finals and we got losers finals. We'll talk about winners finals first because we need to talk about who's going into the losers finals. But winners finals here, we've got G2 Esports taking on Mad Lions. Kind of the 2 best teams pretty easily, in my opinion, throughout most of the summer split. And for a lot of the reasons I mentioned, I'm actually going to go with G2 Esports in this series. The versatility that this team offers is unreal, and I actually think they match up pretty well against Mad Lions. We talk about Mad having a really good read and being basically perfect for the meta that we're in right now. Well, G2 is also really good for that. They just don't have to play for that. Someone like Niski is great at playing super supportive, but it's not like Caps is a bad supportive mid that is willing to go with his jungler and make plays bottom lane. It's not like he's not willing to pick the Tilly and do that. It's just that that really is what Mad loves to do. G2, I think, can counter that style, maybe with a better version of that, or with just more aggression through the mid lane, punishing Niski's overextending mistakes a little bit more. I think G2 overall should have the series locked up. I'm going to pick G2 in 4 or 5, maybe even 3. I think G2 should have this locked, maybe 3 or 4. I'm probably closer to 4. I can see Mad winning a game, but G2 just should be the better team here. And that leads us to losers finals, which is a rematch of round 1, Mad Lions and Rogue. And just like in round 1, I have Mad Lions being the better team here. I just think they have a better read on the meta. I think they're basically built perfectly for this meta. And I think that's really going to help them get to the finals. Rogue just don't have that X factor if they get behind early. And I think that's really been something that I've been stressing on throughout the majority of this split overall. And I think that continues here in playoffs. Just like I thought it would be in 3 or 4 games, maybe even 5 in the first round, I think it'll be similar here. Mad should be the better team, but it really shouldn't be, like Rogue can take games off of them. So if this went to Mad Lions, I'd say probably 4 or 5 for Mad. And then you get grand finals here. G2 Esports versus Mad Lions, in my opinion, what are easily the 2 best teams in the meta right now in Summer Split. And I have G2 winning. I just think they're pretty unstoppable right now. Like, they just are so clearly, in my opinion, the best team in the LEC. They should be going to Worlds as the number 1 seed, unless things drastically crumble around them. Jankos and Caps are the perfect mid-jungle duo, not only for this meta, but basically for any meta. Broken Blade's hitting a stride at the right time. Flacken and Targamas, while they're not perfect, I still think are really good. And overall, I just think G2 should be able to handle Mad Lions here. Again, 4 games, I would say. It really shouldn't be all that complicated for G2 to cruise to a win, especially because we know that all of these players step up in the clutch, and I would expect this team, which has shown pretty much to be the best team in the LEC, to continue to show that they are the best team in the LEC come playoff time. But that's it. That's my bracket prediction. Let me know what you guys think of all of that, whether it be my award predictions, my playoff previews, my bracket prediction, all of that down in the comment section below. I love chatting it up with you guys. I know you're going to have different opinions than me. Do you agree with G2 winning the grand finals? Do you agree with Mad being a really consistent number 2 here? Do you agree with Fnatic ending up making Worlds over Misfits? All of those things I want to hear about down in the comment section below. And, while you're down there, you might as well hit the like and subscribe button. I don't usually talk about that too much on this channel, but if you did really enjoy the content, hit the like button. The subscribe button is waiting. Obviously, I'm posting a ton of playoff content here for every region, for LCS, LPL, LEC, LCK, all of that. I've posted a bunch already, been going over all the rounds in both the LPL and the LCK. Even LCS has already gotten their round 1 video out. So if you guys are interested in that, I highly recommend not only do you subscribe, but go check out those videos. We do put a lot of work into our playoff content, and we really hope that you are enjoying it. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.